Once upon a time, there was a plan to build a phallic symbol in Manhattan to show the might of the USA. The world's leading architects and engineers worked to satisfy this demand. The result was not just the highest building in the world, but two. So that point was nailed home. In line with Superman leaping tall buildings' aims, they had to be capable of being struck by airline jets, and also be impossible to bring down by nefarious villains. Careful checks were made to make sure that the steel would withstand severe fires, as people didn't like the idea of working a quarter-mile up in the sky if they couldn't get out in an emergency. The engineers proudly proclaimed that the steel would withstand a 3-hour severe fire and the building could be struck by
multiple impacts of jetliners,
as it would just be like
mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting.
It would laugh at hurricane winds and snicker at attempts to bomb it. Time passed until it was noticed by the owners that they were having difficulty in finding tenants to fully occupy the massive spaces they had constructed. Rumblings about having deadly asbestos throughout them didn't help. Offload was the cry before we are lumbered with massive costs. Along comes a knight in white armor, in the shape of Lucky Larry, who bought the lease in June of '01. Hooray, cried the masses. Larry to the rescue. He rapidly insures the entire World Trade Center complex against terrorist attack and smiles contentedly. He is well named as Lucky because within a few months, 19 Arabs, led by a man on dialysis using a laptop in a cave in Afghanistan, managed to circumvent the might of the entire USA defense system and arrange for jets to go wildly off course, strike 2 of the phallic symbols of USA's power in Manhattan, and bring down 3 buildings there. What the fuck, cried the stunned government. How can this be? We couldn't envisage people flying planes into buildings deliberately. At least only 3 times in the last few years. And anyways, the plans were made. We're only pretend. It isn't our fault. Didn't you see that we were already practicing drills to counter such identical events that day, and that's why all our defenses were confused? Wait a minute. Did I just say that we couldn't envisage people flying planes into the building? Well, what I meant was, Anyway, it was Bin Laden who did it. Anyone can see that, and the guy in downtown Manhattan wearing a Hardy shirt could see what happened straight away and told you.
I saw this plane come out of nowhere and just ream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
And we know that steel frame buildings have never fallen down like this before. But fear not, we will ask the world's leading experts, NIST, to explain what happened. Time passes and the world falls into 3 kinds of people. One who understands science and physics, who can see that what they have been told is contrary to all the laws of physics. One who understands science and physics, but finds it impossible to overcome their disbelief that they would be lied to by their government, and are capable of ignoring what they see. Then there are those who watch the ball game on TV. The points at issue are fairly basic. The first group asks why gravity works sideways that day. Massive 6-ton steel sections were observed and measured to reach 60 miles an hour within the first yard of movement and fly sideways for 300 feet to embed in adjacent buildings. Surely any rational person could expect gravity to work downward. People from Group 2 accept that if the government say it can do that, then yes, gravity can work sideways. People from Group 3 are busy looking at the TV schedule for the next ball game. Group 1 asks why the top part of one building began to tilt slowly to one side, but when it reached 22 degrees list, it disobeys the laws of angular momentum and turned to dust. Group 2 say that if the government says that's possible, then why should they be questioned? Group 3 is looking for their 4th beer. Along comes another hero. Up gallops Besant. On September 13th, he released a comprehensive report explaining why these buildings became the first 2 in history to fall this way. He didn't need to investigate or do any forensic tests. He just knew. Group 1 checked his math and found schoolboy errors. Group 2 checked his math and gave him an A+. Group 3 asked, what does the word maths mean? Besant imagined the entire floor of the building to disappear when making his first and crucial calculation. The resulting impact speed of the upper block of the tower of 19 miles an hour was then used to proceed to compound that error. Group 1 stared in disbelief at the magnitude of these errors. Group 2 nodded wisely and said, good work, Besant. Group 3 was looking for the TV remote hidden under 10 beer cans. Meanwhile, back at NIST, they have been told to ensure at all costs that the report must end at the initiation of collapse, and under no circumstances must they try to explain how all the laws of physics were broken that day by looking at total collapse. That was tricky, until, out of the blue, they got a report from Underwriters Laboratories, who had retested a duplicate of floor truss. After firing a shotgun at the fireproofing, they put it in a furnace, loaded it with double load, heated it to double the temperature, and for double the time. Eureka! They sagged 47 inches, enough to pull the outer walls inward, and the upper block would fall, just as Besant had calculated. Go to press. Group 1 said, hang on. A manager at Underwriters Laboratories, Kevin Ryan, had been arguing that these tests had shown 4 inches, but was being ignored. He was concerned that NIST was working on false data, so went directly there to inform them. 2 things happened. He was fired by Underwriters Laboratories, and NIST ignored his information as they needed 47 inches to make their story work. Group 2 said Kevin Ryan was being disloyal. How dare he undermine his company's integrity? He probably wears brown shoes with a black suit. He can't be trusted. And anyway, the government has told us 47 inches, so what's the problem? Group 3 were asleep and missed the last quarter of the game. And so it goes. Questions about squibs, questions about total energy calculations and kinetic equations, dust test positive for energetic thermetic material, billions of iron-rich microspheres in all the dust in Manhattan that indicate molten metal. Group 1 stacked up the evidence. Group 2 refused to apply scientific method to examine the evidence and prefer their belief-based system. Group 3 worry that they have lost their freedoms and that their constitution is being ignored and wonder why. The end.